Hi everybody, this is Agnes from Sediment, and today let's try to find an answer to a long-lasting, fiery debate amongst wine lovers. Small versus large wineries. Does size really determine the quality? Somehow, many wine lovers believe that an authentic story, true terroir expression, and real quality can only be found with small wineries. This video is not made to defend the large brands. However, I want to talk a bit more about this topic and taste wines side by side from small and large wineries to determine what is what. Small disclaimer here, one of the main regions and wine styles where special attention is paid towards small versus large brands is Champagne. And I do think this topic deserves a video of its own and certainly a tasting of its own. Therefore, I have made a decision to exclude Champagne from this video. But what actually is a small winery and what is a large winery? Before we taste, let's discuss some key aspects that, in my opinion, differentiate small and large wine producers. Also, I will deliberately not use the phrase family-owned because I think it has been worn down. There are many wine estates, empires really, that are still family-owned and by no means operate like small wineries. One of the most important factors, if not the only factor that determines what is a small and a big winery, is the production volume. In my view, a winery that produces less than 100,000 cases per year is a small estate. And of course, these numbers will vary amongst winemaking countries and winemaking regions. Small production volume has been praised up to an absurd level, and I have heard too many sommeliers and wine lovers using it as a single argument for quality. However, small production volume does not equal high quality without further questions asked. Good and healthy fruit, understanding viticulture and quality-oriented winemaking is what equals good or great wine. And there are both large and small producers out there who deliver high-quality and low-quality wines. I want to point out here that in order to supply the demand of large retailers worldwide, very often these large brands will need to source grapes, juice, or even wine from an outside suppliers. In contrast, the majority of small wineries will only source grapes from the vineyards they own. Therefore, the ability to have full control over the grape varieties, clones, rootstocks, yields, and viticultural choices in general definitely gives advantage to these smaller estates. Whether or not they have resources in terms of finances, labor, and technology to take full advantage of this is another important question we must ask though. For example, I know this great small producer in Austria who has been working their vineyards biodynamically for the longest time. And when the time comes to protecting their wines from frost or diseases, they will start with their top vineyards and sometimes will not have time or resources to protect the rest of their holdings. This brings us to another important topic: consistency. Large brands are often defined by their availability and recognizability worldwide. Because they produce millions of bottles, they can supply large chain retailers with their product. And keeping this in mind, many will argue that retaining a certain quality year after year, bottle after bottle, is more important because failing to do so might result in the loss of trusty clientele and damage the brand itself. So, to achieve this consistency, large brands will source fruit from different areas within the region or sometimes from different regions within a country. Smaller wineries simply might not have the resources for this, and if their fruit is damaged by disease or hail, they might be forced to release smaller volumes or wine that are not of the same quality as in previous years. Also, in the winemaking, large brands will have the means to invest in the latest technologies such as optical grape sorters, temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, or even elevators made only for the tanks to eliminate pumping altogether. That said, larger estates will often produce wines that appeals to a broader wine consumer palate and oftentimes take fewer risks. On the other hand, small wineries may want to, and sometimes be even forced to, experiment with different blends, wine styles, fruit quality, and winemaking techniques, leading to sometimes interesting, in best cases exciting, but also often unpredictable results. And we cannot forget the price and availability. Even though large wineries and empires offer wines at various prices, starting from entry level below $9.99 and up to sky is the limit, I guess. In general, because they produce and move such large volumes, they have the ability to place their wines at a lower price point and often even add some exciting promotion. Meanwhile, small wineries and estates simply cannot survive and compete at specific price level if they want to stay financially sustainable. That said, at a certain price point, there are small artisanal estates that offer amazing value wines where larger brands might fail. Now that we have discussed all of this, let's finally move to the tasting and see what is what. I have chosen 2 reds and 2 whites in pairs. In each pair, I have a large and small estate represented at a similar price point. And each pair is from the same country and same grape variety. So let's taste. Wine number 1. So this is ripe yellow apple, ripe stone fruits, some citrus like lemon, and maybe even orange. But it also shows some lees and batonnage, maybe, you know, some freshly baked bread and some creme fraiche. So there is some lees aging to it, some complexity from winemaking. On the palate, wine is fruit-driven, lively, juicy, and I like it. It is not the most complex and long-lasting wine you will ever have, but I mean, it is juicy and refreshing, and it just delivers that refreshment that you kind of want and expect in a hot summer day. I think it is quite interesting, but it also shows some of that textural element. It's not only acidity and fruit on the palate, it adds a bit of weight to the mid palate, so it allows wine to stick a bit longer. I think it is quite pleasant wine, and if I would have to give it points right away, I would give it 91, I think. Yeah, definitely. So let's try wine number 2. So this one is more fruit driven. There is less of that winemaking on the nose, and it is also a bit zestier. So if the first wine was more driven by ripe fruit, yellow apple, even some stone fruits and peaches, this one is more citric, and there's almost like some green elements, maybe like lime or lime peel even. And it is not as expressive as wine number 1 was. It is more shy. This is very interesting because on the nose it seems zestier, it seems more citric fruit driven. So I was expecting higher acidity, but actually on the palate it shows much lower acidity than the wine number 1. I almost feel bad that this is the second wine I tasted because it seems not necessarily flabby, but after the freshness of the wine number 1, it seems a bit flat. And I would say that it maybe lacks a bit of that freshness and that zestiness that wine number 1 had. And I almost feel that there is some bitterness, some like phenolic grip on the back palate, which I did not find with wine number 1. I will say that I preferred wine number 1, and for wine number 2, I would give 88 points. So let's move to the red wines. Wine number 3. So this is relatively pale on the color, showing some garnet notes. It is fruit driven, but I think it also shows a bit of alcohol on the nose, which I am confused about. And there's also some of that kind of green, black, olive earthiness to it, which might maybe come from stem inclusion or partial stem inclusion in the wine. There is also some of that smokiness and vanilla-like toastiness that could be due to the oak aging. So it actually shows a lot of layers, not only fruit, but also some of that winemaking, which of course we like in wine. Let's taste it. I definitely do not feel that kind of expressive alcohol that I felt slightly on the nose. So on the palate, it is very juicy, lively wine. It is not zesty or acidity driven wine, but then again, this is a grape variety that is not the zestiest of the grapes. It is Grenache. I chose Grenache. I think grape variety that is quite difficult to work with. And this is light style and maybe not as concentrated and dense, but rather fruit driven and easy to enjoy. Again, beautiful summer wine. I will give it 90 points. Wine number 4. Okay, so this is much deeper in color, which would bring me to think that it might be a bit more concentrated on the nose, which it seems it is. It shows both red fruits and dark fruits, black cherries, even some prunes there, and slightly jammy character, but it is still relatively fresh. And again, I feel a bit of alcohol, but maybe in this specific case, it is the grape variety. I mean, Grenache likes to develop high levels of sugar, which then translates into wines with elevated alcohol levels. And here I feel on the nose that warmth as well. Let's taste it. Here as well, the alcohol is a bit higher and I can feel it on the palate, but beautifully it is well balanced and kind of backed up with some fruit, and fruit actually is quite long and sticks to your palate. It is completely different style than wine number 3. I mean, wine number 3 was made into that kind of fresh fruit driven, easy to drink style, and I think wine number 4 is made into more opulent, bigger, rounder, richer wine, and maybe even could be meant for some years of aging, not necessarily in terms of aging as in kind of development of more complex flavors, but rather as a wine that can stand some of that years spent in the bottle and definitely not get tired. It is bigger, it is richer, it is more concentrated, and I might say it is made to appeal broader consumer palate, but I think it is still beautiful wine and I will give it 92 points. So, shall we reveal? In the first pair, I said that I liked or preferred wine number 1 better. And it is Michel Bouzereau. And let's open wine number 2, which makes it Louis Latour. So now we have 2 wines, and honestly, both wines are family owned. Only Michel Bouzereau is a bit smaller, several times smaller, and Louis Latour is this huge négociant, and they definitely make wines from grapes that they buy. Michel Bouzereau is not necessarily the smallest estate in Burgundy. There are much smaller ones, and they own, I think, around 10 or 12 hectares of vineyards, but Louis Latour is definitely the big brand here. The one thing that I told you, they might make wines that appeal to a broader taste. It is here, you can feel it. I mean, the acidity is kind of backed down a little bit, and we wine lovers, we love acidity. I mean, you talk with sommeliers, you talk with wine professionals, they're like, I love acidity, Chenin Blanc, Riesling, Chablis, give it to me. And for me as a wine professional, of course, I thought it maybe lacked some of that freshness. But overall, clean, perfectly made wine, maybe nothing really to write home about. So shall we reveal the wine number 3 and 4? In this specific case, I actually preferred wine number 4, which in my opinion was the larger brand, but let's see. So this was wine number 3, 90 points. And indeed, it is Blewitt Springs McLaren Vale Grenache. We actually have tasted it in one of the tastings that was dedicated only to Australian wines that do not get the recognition outside of Australia that they should have. So, do you have any guesses what could be the big brand from Australia. And that's Penfolds, of course. Bin 21 Grenache. Actually, believe it or not, this was the first time I tasted this specific wine. And I guess I kind of knew the character or the estate style here because it was very, very prominent. And I think Penfolds is one of those large brands that do deliver quality. I'm not necessarily the fan of all of their labels, but there are some specific labels that I'm absolutely in love with, and I think this specific wine offers great value. Actually, I just realized it almost seems staged. It is not, I promise you, it is not. But in the first pair, which was white wine from Burgundy, I preferred the smaller estate. And in the second pair, which was the Australian red wines, I preferred the larger estate. So let's be honest, there are winemaking regions, winemaking countries, even grape varieties and wine styles where this really matters. I mean, when you are looking for a pet nat or, you know, some specific, authentic, unique style that represents its small terroir, you want to go for a smaller estate. And when you are looking for something safe, you know, something that you are familiar with and you know the style and you know the character and you know what to expect, you're going for a bigger brand. What I want to say here is that big estates, big brands are good, they make good wine. And small estates and small brands and small wineries are good. They make amazing wine as well. So the question lies, do we want to support bigger, larger brands, or do we want to support smaller estates, family owned? I'm sorry, I promised I will not use that, but like, you know what I mean. Family owned wineries. And but it is also about whether or not these wines are available. Because let's be honest, Michel, Bouzereau and Blewitt Springs, they're not easily to source. It is much easier to go into a large retail store and buy wine that you know you are familiar with, that you know will deliver the quality. It is much easier to source Penfolds and Louis Latour in any place you travel. It is almost impossible to source these other wines. So I will not ask you which do you prefer, because I believe that many wine lovers and wine enthusiasts will say, of course, these are the smaller brands. But I will ask you to let me know in the comments which are the large brand that you like and which are the small estate that you also love. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click on the next video here.